Brilliant. So welcome, Vishal, and thank you for joining this discussion today. Actually, thank you for leading this discussion today. Yeah, with regards to your bio, lots of interesting points, lots of things that I'm sure our participants or viewers on Facebook would like to learn more about. So I'm going to be looking at questions on Facebook. So if you have any questions, if any participants have questions on Facebook, then I'm going to read them out to Vishal. But Vishal, before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. And I'm sorry for the quite typical IT issues to start the proceedings. But I have been inspired to reflect on myself by Natasha. And I've identified ego as one of the issues that have perhaps plagued my life. And as my one and only prop, this was me way back in the beginning.
That's before the ego came into play, right?
And now, yes, it's an experience. So I think it's something that I want to share with everyone, and I'm happy to do so because I've found it liberating. I've come from a family of doctors and had a quite compassionate by nature, but also nudged into the field of medicine out of necessity and cultural and a few other issues. But I was well suited to it because I was compassionate by nature. But and I'm grateful to my family for very spiritual upbringing that led to what I thought was a spiritual being having a human experience. And that was probably my first fixed belief, which identified, and now on reflection, I can realize my ego is that why do you have this belief? And are we not all spiritual beings or having a human experience, or are we just, is there more to it? However, I continued along that, studied medicine as per my bio, but that led to some angst and performance related things that I had to move forward into and motivate myself. And I often say it was my fuel tank was fueled by perhaps competitiveness and getting into medical school and passing exams, and it sort of led me off the beaten track to some extent. So that's where that's where I started out in this journey.
Okay, so you talked. That's quite interesting. You talked about in one of our previous discussions as well. You talked about in order to A, make it to medical school, but B, survive in medical school, you've almost had to fill your fuel tank with the wrong type of fuel. Or I can't remember your exact words, but yeah, the fuel that didn't feel right to you. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about that in terms of?
It was the fuel was anxiety, anger, motivation mixed with ambition, and those can fuel you. But as in our previous talks, I felt that it's not a clean burning fuel. It's a bit like diesel, in current context, where it's a bit smelly, and it's not eco-friendly, and it's not ego-friendly. And this is where this whole ego is because you start making or believing things about yourself and pushing yourself in certain directions that may not actually be the truth. And this is where reflection has helped me.
And you've also talked about competition and competitiveness becoming an issue, in terms of there's limited spaces in medical school and what you need to get in, etc. So there's this competitiveness that you've alluded to in previous discussions. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's almost self-imposed. It's sort of the education system. It's currently I'm a clinical tutor at Cambridge, which is the real highest echelon of academics. And you can see that there's very high academics, but implementation is a different component to it. And medicine itself had its a conflict for me, because it's quite a structured, I wanted to do good in the world, and which is a sort of very broad perspective. And then when you go to medicine, it's quite didactic, it's quite structured, it's followed this clinical protocol, it's rule-based, it's pharmacologically heavy. And I was like, oh, hang on. In fact, I had a crisis in medical school. I thought, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to finish. And it was almost that fuel tank that it just, the momentum of it was, well, look, just finish this. And it's a means to, it's a means to an end. And it was, yeah, I suppose I felt that medicine had lost its humanism. And yeah. Well, patients were, how can I put it? It was pathology versus the person, where it was, we were like snipers. We go straight in, well, there's cardiac, there's respiratory, there's neurological, but actually that's pathology and not versus the person paradigm. And the spirit is spiritual being material. I suppose even in medicine, patients are almost are material, and I pun on the word material because it's materialistic or materialism, and sometimes one could argue that patients are a paycheck. And I'm not suggesting this that's, but it is an incentive, and it's perhaps not the approach where you don't always need a pill to sort something out, or a protocol or a textbook.
Okay, so what I'm understanding is that you'd started on this journey, of medicine, coming from almost a perspective of you're a spiritual being, obviously having a material experience. I want to explore what spirituality means to you, but before we go there, let's just do a brief summary of what you've just said. Is that you're a spiritual being having this material experience, obviously coming from a family that's deeply spiritual, so you had that spiritual grounding. That coupled with the fact that you were intrinsically or intuitively compassionate by nature, that led you to want to study medicine or want to be a doctor in terms of being altruistic. And however, in order to get to medical school, number one, you felt like you were using the wrong type of fuel to get there, which may have been going against your intrinsic beliefs. And then number two, once you got to medical school, you faced other challenges based on the fact that medicine wasn't exactly what you thought it was, or it wasn't humanistic enough for you, or didn't enable you to be as altruistic as you wanted to be. I mean, maybe you want to just tell us, what was that conflict that made you want to give up medicine or not want to complete that degree?
It's not that, it was that moment when you sort of achieve something. And I did end up graduating, probably, I was very immature at the time, and it was a realization. Now I can look back, hindsight is 2020, and you can look back and you say, well, actually it was my ego that had driven me to that point where my definition of myself was actually, I was a doctor, I was Dr. So-and-so, and it's like, hang on a second, that doesn't define you and what you are. It's actually, that's your ego, and it's your judgmental nature. And that's what I found the key thing, that you start judging things, and it's awkward. And why there's this conflict is that as medicine, you have to keep on a very objective hat and try to work through a series of a medical sieve. We actually call it a triage or medical sieve, where you work through a series or set of presenting issues and try to find the best possible treatment modality or outcome. And sometimes you realize, actually, maybe not. Maybe it's just having a listening ear, or the concept which is the doctor is the therapy. Just being able to converse. And I think, especially with post-COVID, with a lot of these issues, it's the sense that human connection and collaboration is a form of treatment rather than a pill.
Okay, so I do apologize. The meeting wasn't recorded and thus far, but we've just started. Yeah, so you bring up, you bring this up often. I think you've talked about it in previous discussions, and it's definitely in your bio. But you talk about this doctor persona versus your personal ego. Is that what you allude to? As the doctor, you've got to almost put on this rational hat, become objective, um, even if sometimes you feel the patient just needs compassion.
Yeah, yes, I'd agree with that. It's just that sometimes you get trapped up in your own, um, your own ego. Is that oh, this is what I should be doing, and it's a sort of hat that you wear. I'm quite amused because a lot of my images I have a hat, and sometimes you have to take the hat off or be able to wear two hats and say, well, that is part of it, and you're safe, clinically safe and astute in your clinical reasoning, but it's I think how I described it to you is it's your yoga has helped the breathing exercises, where there's one particular, well, there's two things. You talk about standing on your own 2 feet. Irrespective of whether you're a doctor, whatever, you're a spiritual being. And in humility, it's just being a spiritual being, or just being a being. What I was a human doing, do this, do that, do that. I want to become a specialist. I want to get this exam, do this. And you're like, hang on a second, just be a human being. And one of the things that you first taught me by stealth, I would also add, that just stand in mountain pose, your feet are grounded, inhale, exhale deep with the intercostal muscles, and appealed to me because you mentioned a lot of anatomical, so it appealed to that medical aspect to me, that you were describing it anatomically or physiologically correctly. So like, I understand that. And
Once again, it's speaking to the doctor ego.
yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a bit. And I mean, in fact, you did it by stealth. You said, no, I need a doctor for my classes in the community center in case somebody collapses. And I was, this is my ego. Oh, I can help. I'm super actually, I started, you said, well, if you're here, why don't you do the class? And then I said, oh, okay. And I listened to what you'd said, the grounding. You place your feet firmly on the ground, and reminding myself and sitting up correctly as well, and breathing correctly. And it was a revelation to me in terms of using your body and the flex, the body, using your understanding your body and understanding that the body and the mind are connected. And if you have more flexibility within your spines, sitting, standing upright, posture, standing well grounded on your own 2 feet, you don't need these egotistical concepts. And I regard them as a psychological construct. I'm the doctor, I'm this, I'm just me. And
So you're standing in your own ground as opposed to this external persona.
yes, standing on my own 2 feet. I mean, I sort of tried to describe it as that.
Okay, so there's a few very interesting things that you brought up, and I think it's words that we all hear and we all try to navigate, and one of them is spirituality. You talked about being a spiritual being in a human body. What does spirituality mean to you? What is spirituality?
Spirituality is having the ability to reflect, be yourself with humility and gratitude that you are what you are, where you are, and it's the acceptance of that in a positive way, in a constructive way, because I regard that, I mean, the word that often goes with me is things, ego and pride, and you start self-bashing yourself. Oh, well, I could have, and spirituality is directly, intrinsically linked with your self-perception, your self-awareness, and your awareness of everything around you. So if I could sort of, I know it may sound a bit shallow, but it's awareness. It's spirituality is awareness of ourselves and awareness of those around us. And if you have that awareness, you can see the spirituality, you can see the soul, you can see the light in everything around you.
So I'm just trying to understand, because you said a spiritual being sorry, you didn't say material body, but you said human body.
No, what is it? Spiritual being having a human existence or having
Having
a.
a existence. Okay, and then you talked about, in terms of you having that belief, that spiritual, that particular belief that you were a spiritual being having a human experience. And, obviously that is tied in with your sense of self, your ego,
Yes,
what you think you are, or who you think you are.
yes.
And based on that, you had an idea of what medicine should be, what doing the right thing should be, what being the compassionate doctor should be. And then you found that at loggerheads with this doctor persona.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's maybe a few people on the call. I'm not, there may or may not be, but if I could put one word, it was arrogance. I was arrogant. I was, it was just like, gung ho, medic marine, and it actually really, when you look back, you think I could have just been a bit more insightful. I could have been a bit more humble, and I can now see in hindsight that it's calmness of yourself, calmness of what you're doing, and perspective that helps so much.
So what I'm trying to understand is, at that point, where you saw this conflict between how you saw yourself, or your personal ego, versus your doctor persona, right? And then you've had this sort of realization of being grounded, being true to yourself. And what I'm trying to understand is how your consultation, or your actual practical ability to function as a doctor changed during both those before you've made that change, and when you became aware of standing in your own 2 feet, being grounded. How did that alter the way you practiced?
Well, I mean, it's a lot thanks to you, because you had said this, be the lotus, and I didn't quite understand that. You told me that, and it's the perspective, it's the awareness, it's the gratitude. And I think in the previous one I spoke about this whole monkey concept, your monkey mind, it jumps to all of these things. So when you said be the lotus, I was thinking, oh, I'm the monkey. How can I jump onto the lake, pluck the lotus, and then, or I was a bit of a Venus flytrap. I was just, it was a sense of, well, it was just ambitious, and this how I explained why the whole monkey concept is talking about is, I'm not sure. Well, people may be aware, but you can catch a monkey by putting a treat inside a bottle, or something with a tight neck, and the monkey who will put their hand into it, and of course this is a fixed jar, and they will feel either the banana inside it, and they will hold on to it, and you caught the monkey, because the monkey is just not able to let go of the treat inside. If he does, so there's the concept of a bottle, and they grab onto it and they won't let go, and therefore they are trapped. So you actually, it's a monkey trap. And if they just had the insight to let go, they can easily pull the hand out. And that's the sort of trap that I feel mentally we're in, where just let go, just let it go. And I think if the transformation that you describe is just let it go. Don't take it personally. Just, it is what it is. You do your best that you can do, and practice the best that you can, whether it's your intention or your yoga or your spirituality.
And what's the practical implications like in everyday life? Because the other word that you bring up is pragmatic. You have a pragmatic approach to life. So in terms of what does pragmatic mean to you, and how do you navigate these both areas of your personality, the spirituality and then the pragmatism?
It's actually called sense and sensibility, keeping your senses about you, sensible in what you do. I'm not going to go and practice medicine in Guatemala, where I can't speak the language. I am very nomadic in my ways, and I try to practice in a lot of parts of the world, but you have to be practical, pragmatic, practical, and insightful, in that you can make life easy or you can make life difficult. And there's actually so I found a new phase in my life where I make choices that are perhaps not monetarily or influenced by the societal influences. And people say, why are you doing that? Come on, you could, you would, you. And it's like, yes, I could, but I don't need to. And in fact, coming back to one of the yoga things that you talked about, breathing, I had this feeling when you tell us to inhale, we inhale, and there's a moment that you stop after your full inhalation and before you exhale. And it's just like the peak of a cliff where it's a Zen moment where you don't need to do anything. You have enough air for a good 20 to 30 seconds, and you just have that peace that at that moment, you are in charge or the architect of your own life. And then you exhale. And I found that quite a revelation for me, that you can argue with the patient that they shouldn't or couldn't, and to be fair, it's not a patient, it could be with anybody in life, from down at the shop or fighting with somebody with the parking. It's no big deal. You can make it a big deal, or and that's the choice. That's the singular point of calmness. And people, I actually, to some extent, I think there's a bit of toxicity of the self-help thing. Is all the self-help and all these books coming out and exude positivity and keep a positive outlook. It's like, oh, it's tiring. There's all these, they give you all these instructions and rule books and the 10-minute rule and the 10-minute, 1-minute manager and the 10 rules to success and the 12 rules of, it's like, oh my God, you're inundated with all these. It's just be yourself. Everybody does not conform to it. And I think that's probably trying to answer your question. Medical, it makes you conform, and it's something I don't really like. It's like, you've got to be yourself as well. So you don't have to conform to have credibility within society.
Yeah, that's one of the main reasons we have this structure, this persona forming. Because very often, you get this, you get people say, well, in order to be seen as an expert in a certain field, you need to have that persona. So what you're saying is you don't need the persona for the credibility.
You don't, but you need to make sense, and you have to practice what you preach. I think is important. I do see a lot of the benefits of having a professor or etc. But I think big pharma, there's aspects in and around the medical field, in the field that I'm in, that has cast a lot of doubt on the necessity for things and the sort of monetary motives for some aspects of it. And I don't want to generalize, but it certainly has made me more aware of being authentic. I think I always try, and it's something that you've also told me about, just being authentic, being yourself. But
so in summary, what you're saying is, challenging journey that you've experienced in terms of the ego, whether it is believing that you were a spiritual being, or then you becoming the medical doctor, etc. The central issue to navigating all the conflict that these various ideas that we have about ourselves can give rise to is to become, number one, self-aware. Yeah. So and number two, you talked about being grounded in yourself. So it's a physical grounding within your own body.
Yes.
Right.
And the awareness of your breathing. These are all internal locus of control, where you can control your breathing. And often when you drill down to a lot of the self-help books out there, it's like, focus on your breathing, take a nice deep breath, count, you heard this before, count to 10 before you make an angry response. If you count to 10, you will be able to respond a bit more calmly. But actually, it's the breath work. It's calming. And a very nice thing that you've told me is it's you one breath away from happiness. Just exhale it from your system. So I think I can't take all the credit for this transformation. I think you need to have people to lean on and to help you. And you've certainly helped me with that, with posture, with understanding my body, which has understood my mind. Because when you have I think is a word that I've heard you use a lot, is cognitive flexibility. And I think for me, that started with physical flexibility. So being able to expand my chest properly, and it made me feel more comfortable to expand my mind. You probably can explain that mind-body connection better than I can, but that wouldn't cut it in medicine. It's like, oh, yoga, oh, that's very nice for back pain. Oh, yeah, and there's a sort of limit. They almost limit themselves into a little box and say, oh, okay, yeah, well, yeah, it is helpful for back pain, but it's not only for back pain. And it's the limitations of any system that it conforms or boxes itself into what it understands, and almost there's fear of the unknown. And I mean, I had an unknown fear of yoga. I thought, oh, it opens up kundalinis. Like, I didn't even understand what kundalinis are. It's like, oh, it's a bit of voodoo. And there was my own misconceptions, my own, call it friends, family, all of these perceptions of yoga. And you told me you had practiced yoga from the time you're like 3 or 4 years old. And it was a new world for me. And I had to expand my own horizons to be able to see the benefits of it. But that's the journey that we all have.
So if, for anybody else there who's, sort of working with their egos, and persona, and we will be talking more in depth about persona next week. Our conversation last week was about the ego, but for somebody who's sort of trying to navigate, their place in the world, as we all do, we all have to find our place to a certain degree. What advice would you give to them based on your learning, on where you've come, what you've experienced, what's that personal insight?
That's a good question. I think there's two things. Know yourself. If you know yourself and helped or try to understand yourself, and you do need somebody to maybe give you a few nudge points and like, I think only drawing on personal experience, I had this, I'm a spiritual being, having a human experience, and you pointed out to me, so why are you so special? And it's like, being special or regarding yourself as special is actually discriminatory, and it's judgmental. And unless somebody points that out to you, and so and although as much as it's your own journey, you do need friends along the way. In fact, it's one of the things that when I was young, there's the little thing that we cut out, which is from, you fold up the paper and all the hands are connected and all the feet are connected. And that's when you realize that we all connected. And I think, I can't remember it in fullness, but there's a very nice Zulu saying, which is that we are because of all of us. I'll try and dig it out in a moment, but Ngubuntu. But we are because of the community, and I've definitely benefited from that. I've benefited from these talks. I thought the talks have been very helpful and assuring, because there's a lot of chaos in the world at the moment, and you need something to just steady the reasonable, palatable.
Yeah. To find a platform to share experiences, because sharing experiences and sharing common experiences as well. I think it's a way for us to understand ourselves. One way for us to understand ourselves, but also to discover a framework.
Yes.
Start thinking about self-awareness. Because if you tell know yourself, the phrase, we use it often. Right down to the temple at Delphi, etc. Know thyself. But what does that mean? How do we get there? And I think, we get there from interacting, from communication, from, having these discussions with other people who want to get to the same place. Because, we all need to develop a cognitive framework, a way to think about things, we need to develop a cognitive framework, but we can't depend on that framework. So you need to develop a framework to enable you to get understanding about the various concepts, so you may understand yourself. But then once you understand the framework, then you don't need to depend on it. You need to actually become flexible.
I like that concept of framework, because also I think what I was alluding to about medicine is that there's no marks. It's not like, oh, you got 9 out of 10. Oh, well done. You have a very good cognitive framework. It's not a competition. There's no race. It's a marathon. It's we all have this.
In terms of cognitive frameworks, in terms of these frameworks and how we think, there's no perfect algorithm. It's a part of the human creativity in that we all have to create our own frameworks. Yeah, we can understand the basics. Like the whole thing when having conversation, right? If we do not, when we talk, we use words, and words are meaningless until we decide on a shared meaning. And this is the reason I was, asking you about what do you think is spirituality? What does pragmatism mean to you? Because we need to ensure that we're talking about the same thing. That's communication. When we're making an effort to understand each other, when we're talking with each other as opposed to talking at each other.
Yes.
And I think so often that's what happens. We think we're having a conversation, but we're talking at.
And that's humility and respect, I think, and that's what seems to be lacking in the current media. I mean, I don't watch television because it's very nice if they're talking at you and they sort of want trying to convince you of their, and it's no, you need to respect my point of view as well, or at least have some humility. And so I found that thing. It's I am because you are. Ubuntu and Gubuntu and Gabantu means that a person is a person through other people. Its roots are in humanist African philosophy, where the idea of community is one of the building blocks of society. And Ubuntu is that nebulous concept of common humanity, oneness, humanity, you and me both. So, I'm very grateful for the influences I've had from seeing a witch doctor in Valley of a Thousand Hills in Zululand in South Africa, to Pushapatinath in Nepal, where I got my mantra beads, and so I've been very fortunate to have seen all of that, and you can journey outwards or you can journey inwards, and I think that's one of the key aspects of knowing yourself and knowing where your journey lies, and just being I know it's one of these self-help books it comes from, so forgive me, but it does ring true, which is being happy in your own skin.
Yeah. No, but the whole thing is, what you've just mentioned, in that you can journey outwards or you can journey inwards. Well, and also understanding that whenever we're looking, we're looking outside, we're looking at other people, we can only view them from our own prism, from our own blinkers. Right. And therefore, you look outwards and you only see what you're programmed to see. Right. You only see the framework that you're programmed to use. But when you look inwards, you may see your prism, you may see your filters, you may see the framework that you're using, and then you may be able to change it. But for as long as you're looking outwards, you're only going to see what you're programmed to see.
So that was one of the faults that I had I found with medicine, is that it gives you this framework, and then it disparages things that don't fit into its box. Oh, well, what's the evidence base of yoga helping? And it was taking the academic high horse and saying, well, there's no evidence-based studies for it. But I'm sorry, I'm getting points in here, is that big pharma don't let studies reach the surface of the daylight or the media, so that people can have the full awareness of all the research that has happened. So the studies that they choose to allow to proceed, it comes through, and then we get our nice guidelines. I don't agree with all the nice guidelines that I think I've often been prescribing statins, so atorvastatin, Lipitor, and drugs, and the number needed to treat is 367. So we need to treat at a high dose 367 people so that we help one person. And you think, and now the paradigm has changed, where no, they should be looking at nutrition and looking at a diet, at their diet to do this. And it was a similar thing that with marijuana. At one time, oh, marijuana, it's a Class C drug. Now I'm prescribing marijuana for pain relief. And you think, it's just, it's when it suits, it just completely swaps over to what's the flavor of the year, and it's a bit annoying, perhaps for the sarcasm or me being a crusty old doctor.
I suppose, we operate or various, all fields of science, medicine, etc., operates within a certain paradigm. And I think, it takes a brave person to actually look beyond that paradigm, because often to look beyond a paradigm, you have to negate some of the things that maybe you may be deeply grounded in or deeply tied into. But the same thing happens, we're talking about paradigms, but the same thing happens on a very personal level with ourselves. If we hold on to any persona, any ideology, any facade, any hold on to anything, any aspect of our personalities, we don't see the rest of it. And sometimes that's the reason we have this personal resistance to change, because change means negating certain aspects that may have been valuable to us 5 years ago.
So I can't change those concepts. But one thing I'd like to mention, I thought, is, I mean, in the world, the big pharma, we have that awareness, but, coming back to where you said, well, what is spirituality, is that I have done one of your yoga class, I think with the tennis balls, what do you call the myo
release classes,
myofascial release. And the evening of that, when I went to sleep, it was amazing. I had thoughts that I dreams about things from childhood, from school, and I don't know if any of my friends are on this at all, but I'll suddenly phone them up and say, oh, do you remember the time we did that? And I think you spoke about muscle memory, and I couldn't, it's like, I cannot actually explain. I didn't take any medication. I did a yoga class, but I remembered something from primary school, secondary school, high school, something, and and I'll either WhatsApp that person and say, and they go, wow, what made you think of that now? And it was obviously something that was in my internal psyche or locus, and it was released, and I felt so much better for it, and including, my relationship with my family, but it was not, I would have assumed, I need to go for if it went through counseling or something that sort, I would, but actually it was myofascial release, and I'd released something in my.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's the beauty of yoga, right? Yoga is a complete system where you're working with physical, as well as your mind and mental aspects, cognitive, as well as logical, rational, but also intuitive, instinctive. It's working. So when we're talking about mind, there are multiple aspects, either very, very rational, or then there's that deep sense of knowing, and you don't know where the knowing comes from. So it's not the logical way of thinking. So there's various aspects when we think about mind as well. But the beauty of yoga is it has the ability to work through all, from the physical body all the way to the deepest aspects of the mind. And therefore, I suppose I was quite intrigued by you talking about spiritual and human experience, human, and because of my bias, I heard you say, when you said human experience, I almost heard it as talking about this material body, this physical form, because that's part of being human, right? We have a physical body. So, it's about navigating this spiritual, you called it awareness. I call, for me, when I talk spirituality, or if I use the word spiritual, what I actually mean is potential. We all have physical bodies, but as living beings, we have this potential for unlimited creativity, the unlimited ability to change, not just our thoughts and minds and energy within our body, but in the long run, even to change our physiology and our physical bodies. So for me, this is what spirituality means. It's living in that space where you're open to both aspects, to this potential to change and to create, where the world is unlimited.
Yes.
Whereas if we focus too much on the material or the physical, and even when it comes to medicine, if you just focused on just the material aspects, then you may miss this vital ingredient that affects healing, transformation, change, because that's the creative aspect. No therapeutic intervention, drug, physical, whatever, no therapeutic intervention heals the body. It can stimulate the healing process, but it's the body's innate creativity that heals the body.
Yeah. But it's the willingness on your part, like you said, openness to because if people talk about or fears about artificial intelligence and AI, creativity and being human is the counter to that, because I mean, it's going to be a finger prick test that will tell you what your cholesterol levels are, what your diabetic risk is, your function of your pancreas in a finger prick of blood. That it may not even be, it'll be a bit like Star Trek, where it will be able to, you do a full body scan and you realize, oh, okay, so there's only so many things that, yeah, we've got to develop and nurture our creativity going into the 21st century. I think it's
so a very interesting topic that you used to talk about quite passionately in the past was the art of medicine.
yeah.
Something that you were quite, so talk a little bit about the art of medicine and this aspect of creativity that you think is so vitally important.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's specifically related to my tutorship. I take FY1, FY2, so the interns, the junior doctors, their final years of their medical school, and then their first and second years of being a doctor. And there's a dependence on technology. It's like, oh, they've got abdominal pain. Let's do an ultrasound scan, CT, abdo, MRI. And you think, hang on a second, why don't you palpate the abdomen? And coming back to this humanity of just feel the abdomen and consider, because if you don't have all of these imaging modalities, you don't have, what are you going to do? And you actually depend on your humanness. And we use technology as a crutch, but somebody said it, they call it iPhone, it's I. Why don't you just stick with I? Leave the phone out of it, or the dependence. Are you the tool, or is the phone the tool? The phone should be the tool, but I was just amused by the name iPhone, because it's I. It's you are the doctor, whatever it is.
Now you understand eye yoga, because it is you at the end of the day.
Oh,
Secondary. I just had to include that.
That's some brownie points there for punting your brand there.
Yeah, marketing team will be proud.
But that's and there's this, oh, okay, I didn't think about and when you into this, I'm not gonna. It's a framework, like you point out, that, oh, well, you need to make sure and exclude these factors. But often just the art of medicine is something I call about, we have a thing called ideas, concerns, expectations. And I've made that intention is to help someone communicate with them in an active, passive way, engagement. So it's a two-way street. So, and then your delivery. So it's your tone of voice and how you communicate with them. And that's not just a medical consultation model, but that's really a communication model. Because if your intention is to help someone, you don't have any preconceived ideas. We sort of one of the examples I use is this: somebody has a flat tire and there's a house down that they can see, and they walk up to it, and eventually they have so many preconceived ideas about what this person is going to say to them and why they're knocking at their door at 10 o'clock at night, that by the time they reach the door, they've already developed. I'm not sure if it's worth me talking about it, but we can. Are there lots of questions, by the way? Are there anything that I need to respond to?
There is. I'm just looking through the questions now. No, but I have a question for you in, leading back to the one point that you will, you talked about self-awareness, right? Being the key aspect of how to navigate this ego, for somebody who's trying to find, or trying to discover themselves, or trying to find their place in the world. You said self-awareness. Yeah. Now, with, in terms of if self-awareness, right? Become aware of yourself. And in terms of career goals, etc., would that change? Would you suddenly, if somebody says, well, I want to focus on my career, would you give them any other advice, or will it still be self-awareness?
No, I mean, everyone has a choice and they have their own journey to fulfill, because I'm fortunate that I've completed the things that I wanted to. So I could almost, in hindsight, say, well, oh, that. However, does that make you happy is the key question. And happiness is, I think, more broader than that. It's contentment. Are you content doing that? Viktor Frankl talks about this in Man's Search for Meaning.
I do apologize. Yes. Are you content? That is a very, very good question. Now, would you advise somebody, considering career, right? What is the question that you would suggest they ask? Because
that's actually one of the specific questions that we have to answer as part of my role with the medical students and the doctors, that if they don't consider it work, if there's this thing that we all do that we so enjoy doing that you don't even consider it as work, you just patter along and you in such flow, I think, with what's going on, that you don't, and the day is over and hip hip hooray, you've done that. But if it's a grind, you are forcing yourself, you are pushing yourself, and that's why I come back to this fuel tank, the fuel tank of anger, upsetness, anxiety. If you're fueling yourself like that, but you still get through it, and yes, you get there, but it's like a diesel, you can go electric and you just silent, clear, good acceleration, because what you're doing is you're filling yourself with contentment, love, happiness, peace of mind. And that may not mean money. So there's this discrepancy. You've got to break this. It's like a scaffold. It's not monetary based. Easier said than done. And I'm not saying there's certain times in your life you just have to work and you just have to get that done. So if that's a stage in your life and you need to pay back, I mean, I had to pay back a student loan. Yes, you have to grit your teeth, get through that. But during that process, you can expand your horizons, you can transform. So you're not just stopping and saying, oh, after I finish this, after I pay back the student loan, then I'll transform. That may never happen.
So there are times when you have to grit and bear it. But but the aim is to always try and find contentment even during those moments.
But having perspective, even if you are, even if you're struggling through, you have that, perspective.
So there are a few questions. I'm so sorry I missed this, and thank you, Seema, for pointing them out to me. There's a few questions from Seema and Ruth. So Seema says she really likes your approach that you have, pragmatic, practical, to do your best and become self-aware. What she wants to know is, are you able to pass this on to your patients?
I'm able to influence their thinking and give them a different perspective, which helps them, but they have to work on it themselves. So I'm just a seed that just starts the, maybe, or the snowball effect. And if they choose to, and if they look in the right direction. So one of the things I tell patients specifically is go to Waterstones, go to a nice bookshop, flick through a lot of the self-help books, find something that appeals to you and your nature, and look through that and use that. So I'm not saying all self-help books are bad. I'm saying use the tools that you have to reach the goal that you need to.
So you have to find the thing that works for you.
But I'm just to answer Seema's question, I'm just the C. I just start the sort of and think, oh, well, that was a different perspective. And maybe I don't need to take codeine for my back pain. Maybe I'll try yoga, or maybe I'll read a book that would help me have a better understanding of what I'm going through.
So you're able to share your simple, pragmatic tips with clients or with patients, and
well, with most people that I meet, but then it's their initiative after that if they want to proceed or to follow that, because you can take a horse to water.
That's a key point. The only person we can change is ourselves. We have no ability to change anybody else. So there's a question from Ruth. Do you think there's a conflict between the interests of big pharma and raising awareness of our own powers of self-healing?
Absolutely. Unfortunately, dis-ease, actual word is ease. The antonym, the opposite is ease, is dis-ease. And to some extent, they are parlayers of dis-ease. Is that, oh, you need a pill for this. And one of the, I don't know if there's any doctors listening, but restless leg syndrome did not exist, RLS. It's a disease that has been generated in the last 20 years.
Well,
and it's with sleep, and it was just, and that was annoying to me because it was in the interest of big pharma to sell a drug that will help restless leg syndrome. And restless leg syndrome is probably anxiety, it's probably poor sleep patterns, and yeah, but no, it's okay. Take some, well, essentially diazepam. It's a form of tranquilizer, and you'll be okay. And that's unfair.
I suppose if we look at the financial model that big pharma would have to operate on, money is made when people are, when people have pathology, they're diseased, or they're feeling unhappy, unwell, or they're fearful, right? If people were all content, well, and aware of their own self-healing abilities, then there's no need to take medicine. So, I think that's the conflict that arises there. You want to create, so it's not about well-being, it's about maintaining disease
and managing it.
Managing disease.
And we have a minister of health. I like Bhutan, who has a minister of happiness. And I think Saudi, or there's a few other countries in the world now say, well, we need a minister of happiness, because maybe it should be minister of contentment. But there are things that you could do that's not about disease management and disease control. I can go on rambling on about it, but I can talk to Ruth more about it. There's a lovely movie called Breaking the Mold that really inspired me, because before penicillin, big pharma didn't have a bigger grip. It's only since penicillin, which was developed around the corner at St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington by Fleming, that they had something that was truly unique, and that was the snowball that allowed them to be as big as they are. The big pharma is really the second to oil and gas industry in the world. And I could reference this as well to you. General Electric, they make the ultrasound, the 4D scanners, the MRI scanners. So it is in their interest for people to have more scans.
Okay. So I like what Ruth said. Sounds like one way to change the medical paradigm would be to make my-release classes compulsory. They come off part of the medical curriculum.
But there will be such pushback. There will be, it's not, there's this Fisher, or Peter Fisher, who was the head of the, there's a lot of powers that we would not necessarily want. It just doesn't serve their purpose. You'd rather take ibuprofen. It's easier to take.
I think the key aspect that we can take back from all of this is each one of us is responsible for our own health and well-being.
Yeah, and personal responsibility, accountability.
Exactly. And what we need to do is ensure that we're aware of what our bodies need to be well. And yes, not all medicines are bad. Some people need, antibiotics have had their role to play. We've reached where we are because of antibiotics, etc. There are drugs that have helped. So, however, what we need to understand is when we need to take drugs and when we need to give our bodies a chance to actually heal. And also understanding that our bodies have this innate ability to heal.
And when you talk about sense and sensibility, somebody's got acute abdominal pain. Let's exclude an acute appendicitis first. So that's where I say that you have to be practical. And there's, in terms of emergency medicine, that is superb. There's my training based in South Africa is, there is very much a place for that. Those, but then it's knowing when to use the tools at your disposal, and that's your personal mental tools or the physical, clinical modalities.
Well, thank you, Vishal. So is there anything that you'd like to?
If people could leave comments about whether they like a follow-on or if this is interesting, because then we can actually be nice to have questions one-on-one instead of
Yeah.
that people could.
So maybe what we will do is arrange a future discussion pertaining to medicine. Maybe bring in a few other medical doctors, get a point of view from multiple medical doctors, and open it up to our our full group of our yoga participants and philosophy.
I feel a bit self-conscious being the
only
interrogated here.
Yeah, see, but this is what I wanted, to put one person on the spot. So anyway, so next week we talk about persona, because we talk about the ego, and the ego needs to be flexible. As Vishal mentioned, self-awareness and being able to move from a personal ego to sometimes being the doctor or being the researcher or whoever else you are, or the roles you fill, but also having the flexibility to navigate through all of that. And if any role becomes too fixed, it becomes a persona. And personas, though, are sometimes useful and sometimes harmful. So next week, we have a group discussion where we discuss the persona. And the week that follows, we have Seema join us to discuss what it means to be a good person, or the good person persona. So thank you for joining me, Vishal. And there will be questions that will pop up on the Facebook group. And we will also look at having a follow-on discussion on spirituality, medicine, and well-being. So thank you for joining me. Bye-bye. And thank you to everybody on Facebook for joining, as well as your feedback and comments. So thank you. Till next week. Bye.